I saw it, in the mirror's reflection, my sister smiling, as she slipped something into my drink. And in that moment, I knew exactly what to do. I'm Sophia. I've spent my life being the easygoing little sister. But that night, I stopped staying quiet. Because when someone poisons your trust, sometimes the only justice is letting them taste it themselves. Have you ever caught a family member crossing a line you never imagined? Tell me, would you have done what I did? I wasn't supposed to be the dramatic one. That role belonged to Celeste, my older sister. She entered every room like it was a stage, always bathed in soft light and compliments. And somehow she made it look effortless. Growing up in Beacon Hill meant old money, old manners, and old expectations. Our parents believed in appearances, lace gloves at brunch piano recitals before dessert. And in their eyes, Celeste was the crown jewel. I was the quiet one. But silence doesn't mean blindness. I remember the first betrayal like the echo of an old piano key. Junior year, I'd earned a coveted scholarship for a summer marketing program in New York. The night before I was supposed to leave, I came down with sudden, vicious food poisoning. Celeste offered to fill in just for the orientation week. She never gave it back. She returned with a glowing recommendation letter and a new mentor. I returned with guilt and a stomach still twisting from something that didn't feel like coincidence. Still, I said nothing, because that's what Marin women do. We preserve peace. We polish pain into poise. Even when I caught my high school boyfriend texting her during winter break. Even when Mom said, "You should be flattered, sweetie, Celeste only copies people she admires." I swallowed it, like champagne turned flat. Over time, we learned how to function as sisters. We didn't fight. We didn't scream. We simply danced around the fractures. She invited me to her bridal fitting, then changed the location last minute without telling me. She forgot to send me the bridal party itinerary, then acted hurt when I missed rehearsal. Still, I stood beside her as maid of honor, smiling through a headache only she could cause. And I meant it when I wished her happiness. Because Julian, her fiancé, now husband, was different. He had a calming presence, a quiet intelligence. He remembered small things, that I loved mint tea, that I hated the sound of violins in minor keys. When he looked at Celeste, he seemed genuinely in love. And I wanted her to have that. For once. So I kept my distance, built my own life, worked my way up at a boutique marketing firm, dated quietly, failed quietly. Until last week when an envelope arrived on my desk. Thick paper, gold trim, an invitation to Celeste and Julian's 10-year vow renewal gala, Regency Beacon Ballroom. My assistant gasped. I blinked twice. 10 years. That night I stood in front of my closet, unsure if I should even attend. But something tugged. Maybe closure, maybe curiosity, maybe the part of me that still hoped we could fix what had never really been whole. So I bought a new dress, a bold one. Not soft lavender like Celeste would have picked, but deep emerald satin with a slit that whispered, "I see you." As I arrived at the hotel that evening, the autumn wind curled around my ankles. Inside, the air smelled like roses, champagne, and expensive performance. A string quartet played in the corner. Celeste stood at the center like a queen hosting her own coronation. And then she saw me, smile perfect, eyes scanning, voice syrup sweet. "Sophia, you came. That dress risky. Rental." The words brushed past me like a cold draft. I didn't flinch, because I'd learned something over the years. When people underestimate you long enough, your silence becomes your sharpest blade. And that night, I'd learned just how deep it could cut. Celeste was the kind of woman who didn't walk, she presented herself. Even across a ballroom, she managed to glide as if her heels never touched the ground. As I made my way to the welcome table, she intercepted me like a well-rehearsed intercept. Champagne she offered sweetly, already plucking a glass from the tray before I could answer. Her fingers brushed mine, cold calculated. 10 years of love, she said, tilting her glass. Some of us get there, others. Well, you're still in your 30s. There's time. I smiled thin as the rim of my glass. To survival, I replied. In all its forms. A flicker crossed her eyes. Then Julian appeared. He wasn't polished like Celeste tonight, his tie slightly askew, hair too casually mussed for the formality, but his smile when he saw me, that was real. "Sophia, God, it's good to see you." His hug was brief but grounding, warm, steady, not rehearsed. "Congratulations," I offered. 10 years is no small feat. "Depends who's counting," he murmured, just low enough. Celeste's jaw tightened. "Darling, your parents just arrived. We should say hello." "I'll be there in a minute," Julian said without moving. She didn't argue, not yet. Just turned with a flash of irritation so quick it could have passed for wind. When she left, he exhaled. "You look different, stronger, happier maybe." "Maybe," I said. I miss this, he added. I blinked. This talking without agendas. That word settled between us like dust on polished marble. Julian glanced around the room, then leaned in a fraction. Can I say something a little dangerous? I held my breath. Sometimes I wonder if I married Celeste, or the version she curated for everyone else. Before I could respond, his eyes darted to the side. We're being watched. And sure enough, there she was. Celeste, stationed by the dessert table back perfectly straight. But her eyes were locked on us like a hawk circling prey. I gave Julian a quick smile. You'd better greet the guests of honor. He chuckled, then stepped away with the practiced charm of a man who knows how to survive in cages lined with velvet. I watched her watching me. She smirked. I raised my glass. Neither of us blinked. The music swelled behind us, but that wasn't the sound I heard. It was the hum beneath it of something unraveling. And for the first time in years, I didn't look away. I found him again near the terrace doors. Julian stood alone, framed by amber string lights and the soft glow of Beacon Hill behind him. He looked like a man out of place in his own celebration. Needed a breather, I asked, stepping beside him. He didn't look at me right away, just nodded. She's been spinning this event for weeks. Everything, every ribbon, every speech scripted. There was exhaustion in his voice, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what rest ever felt like. Looks flawless from the outside, I offered. He turned then. That's her specialty. There was a long pause. Then quietly, I've been thinking about separating. I blinked. Julian, the loyal, quiet husband. The idea felt absurd and completely logical at the same time. She'd destroy you, I said before thinking. Socially, financially, publicly. I know, he half laughed. That's why I'm still here. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A therapy worksheet creased highlighted. She stopped going after the first session, said the therapist was biased. Against her. I looked at the worksheet. One question was circled. And do you feel safe expressing your needs in this relationship? Julian's silence was answer enough. I don't want to cause a scene tonight, he said. But this party, it's not to celebrate us. It's to distract everyone from the fact that we're done. Before I could respond, there was a light tap on my shoulder. Celeste, smile tight, lipstick perfect. What an intense conversation, she said, eyes sharp. Catching up on childhood trauma, Julian drained the rest of his drink. Just catching up. Her gaze slid to me, then back to him. Well, the caterer's asking about the cake knife. Urgent business. She looped her arm into his nails, pressing against his jacket. But before she turned to go, her mouth brushed near my ear. You're glowing tonight, Sophia. Almost like you want something that isn't yours. Then she vanished with him into the crowd. I stood frozen, breath tight in my chest. The ballroom felt colder now despite the chandeliers. Even the champagne had lost its shimmer. I walked toward the powder room not to cry, but to collect. Inside the mirror stretched wall to wall lined with gold trim. The smell of peonies lingered from the soap. As I reapplied my lipstick, I noticed something. Out in the ballroom, reflected in the mirror, Celeste. Standing by my table. She didn't know I could see her. Her hand dipped into her clutch, then hovered over my champagne glass. A flick of her wrist, a drop, a smile. Then she disappeared back into the crowd. I stared at the mirror, at the glass with my name card still beside it. My heart pounded. She had just drugged my drink, and I hadn't even taken a sip. When I returned to the ballroom, the air felt heavier. Not from the crowd or the chandeliers, but from the knowledge shimmering in that single champagne flute. I sat back at my assigned table, white orchids, gold-rimmed plates, and the glass with my name elegantly lettered beside it. The champagne sparkled innocent. A chocolate-dipped strawberry rested on a napkin embroidered with a delicate V. For my favorite sister. Love, C. The sweetness turned sour in my throat. I scanned the room. Celeste was across the floor laughing too brightly with a group of women in matching nude heels. Julian stood near the gift table momentarily alone. It took me 6 steps to cross the room. Julian, I said softly, holding the flute. We never toasted. Just the two of us. He looked surprised. Another toast? Private one, I smiled. To survival. He chuckled. You and these cryptic lines. Trade drinks with me, I offered, extending the champagne. He lifted his half-full Scotch tumbler. Why? Because I don't drink alone. And champagne's more poetic. He hesitated, then shrugged. I made the switch fast, placed the flute in his hand, and took the Scotch in mine. To 10 more years of knowing who we really are, I said, voice steady. To truth, he echoed. He drank. I didn't. Across the room, Celeste glanced over, and she smiled. She thought I'd taken the glass. I raised the Scotch to my lips and pretended to sip. It burned my nose, not my tongue. Julian wiped his mouth. You always had a dramatic streak. Quiet but lethal. I guess tonight brings out the best in both of us, I replied. He grinned, then wandered back toward the main floor. I stayed behind. watching. 3 minutes later, I saw it. His steps slowed. He paused mid-conversation with a distant uncle blinking too hard. One hand tugged at his collar. Another rubbed his forehead like something was buzzing behind his eyes. Celeste noticed too. She began making her way across the room, lips already forming concern. Julian turned toward the bar, but his walk wobbled. He gripped the back of a chair, laughed too loud at something no one said. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. Whatever she'd dropped into that glass, it was working. But not on me. I was still standing, still watching, still very, very sober. It started with a stumble. Julian brushed past the dessert table, knocking over a plate of crème brûlée. The porcelain hit the floor with a clean, deliberate crack. A few guests glanced over. He mumbled an apology and bent to pick it up, then wobbled again, nearly tipping into a waiter carrying a tray of espresso cups. Celeste appeared instantly. "Darling, you're tired," she cooed, looping her arm around his. "Let's get you some air." But Julian pulled back gently at first, then with more resistance. "I'm fine," he said too loudly. Then again softer, "I'm just lightheaded. Hot in here." His eyes scanned the room, unfocused, then locked onto mine. "Hey," he said, voice slower now. You changed your hair." "I hadn't." Celeste stiffened. "Come with me," she urged through her teeth, trying to steer him toward the side hallway. "Just a moment. Just breathe." Julian jerked away. "I don't want to go with you right now," he said. And that stopped conversations. Forks froze midair. The string quartet faltered, then caught the note again too late. Celeste smiled at the room. "Too much champagne. He's just being silly." Julian blinked again. "No, I'm not." His voice dropped, raw, honest. "I'm tired of pretending." A hush rolled through the tables like a gust of wind through stiff linen. "I've been pretending for 10 years, he said, swaying slightly. "That we were happy and that I was proud, that I was loved." Julian Celeste hissed, her smile cracking like glass under pressure. He laughed too hard. "I told the therapist. I told you. But you always made me feel insane." He looked back at me. "And you, Sophia, you listened. You didn't twist it." Celeste turned storming toward him, hissing, "Stop, now." But he kept talking. "Do you know what it's like living with someone who edits every truth before you can say it?" He took a step forward, then another, then collapsed face first into the cake table. Gasps rippled. Aunt Marian dropped her flute. Someone screamed. I stood. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just stood. The illusion was crumbling, and no one could stop it now. Celeste knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. "Julian, baby, it's okay. Just too much wine." I crossed the room. My voice was calm when I reached her. Maybe it was something else. She looked up, eyes wild. "What do you mean?" I held her gaze. "You tell me, Celeste." Then I turned to the stunned faces, the broken cake, and the silence thick as guilt. This party wasn't just over. It was unraveling thread by golden thread. They moved him quickly. 2 waiters and the hotel manager guided Julian into a private lounge near the ballroom. His legs barely holding weight, his voice slurring apologies that made no sense. Just dizzy, must have been dessert. Celeste hovered like smoke, hand on his back, face frozen in a mask of concern. But I followed them in. So did our parents. The door shut behind us with a soft but final click. "What happened?" my father asked, voice sharp. Was he drinking before this? Celeste opened her mouth. I spoke first. "There's something you all need to know." Everyone turned to me. Julian groaned faintly, slumped on the velvet settee. "That champagne he drank," I said, pointing at the empty flute still in his hand, "wasn't his." Celeste stiffened. "What are you implying?" my mother asked. "That it was spiked." "Yes," I answered. "And it was meant for me." The room fell silent. My father blinked. "What?" "I saw her," I said, not looking away from Celeste. "Through the ballroom mirror. She dropped something into my drink." "No," Celeste snapped. "That's insane." "Then explain the residue in the glass. Explain the strawberry with my name card. Explain why you watched me so closely after." She opened her mouth, closed it. Something flickered in her eyes, panic maybe. "You switched glasses," my mother whispered. I nodded. "I didn't know what she put in it. I wasn't going to drink it. But I needed her to know I saw her. And I needed someone to see the truth." Julian stirred beside us. "You saved me." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because in that moment, everyone in the room knew the performance was over. And the real story had just begun. The hotel manager brought water, but Julian couldn't hold the glass. His hand trembled too much. His pupils were dilated. The moment the hotel's on-site medic entered the room, I stepped back and let her work. I didn't need to interfere. I needed to document. I pulled out my phone. No, I didn't record. Instead, I opened the hotel's event page. Regency Beacon prided itself on full security coverage for all ballroom-level events. That included hallway cameras. And I remembered exactly where Celeste had been standing beside the cake table just outside the East Corridor camera's field. I quietly stepped out of the room, weaving through concerned guests and staff still murmuring near the ballroom doors. "Excuse me," I said to the concierge. "Could I speak with hotel security? There may have been tampering with food or drink tonight." The man blinked, hesitated, then nodded and made a call. 10 minutes later, I was sitting beside a monitor watching time-stamped footage. 8:46 p.m. There, Celeste paused by the serving station. She pulled a small object dark cylindrical from her clutch. She glanced both ways, then dipped her hand toward a tray. One of the security guards rewound and enhanced the angle. She wasn't near the food. She was near the customized drinks. There were only 2 flutes with name cards, mine and hers. I took a screenshot and saved it. My hands were steady. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt surgical. By the time I returned to the lounge, EMTs were loading Julian onto a stretcher. "I'll go with him," Celeste announced, adjusting her shawl. "No," Julian rasped. "Not you." The medics paused. "I don't want her with me," my mother gasped. Celeste's face turned from porcelain to bone white. "Julian," she began, "you're not yourself. You're confused." "No," he said. "For once I'm not." As they wheeled him out, he reached for my hand. "Sophia, tell the truth." I nodded once, firm, quiet, then turned to my parents. "There's security footage," I said, "and I have a witness." "What witness?" Celeste snapped, eyes glassy. "The mirror," I replied. She flinched. Before anyone could speak, the hotel manager entered. "We've contacted law enforcement," he said carefully, "and the hospital will run a talks panel." Celeste laughed, a sharp breaking sound. "This is insane." I offered her a drink. "She's spinning this into drama because what she's jealous, you're jealous, Sophia." I didn't answer, because just then the waiter from earlier approached us. "I didn't want to get involved," he said nervously. "But I saw Mrs. Rowe drop something into the glass. I thought it was maybe a vitamin or something. But after everything," my father inhaled sharply. My mother, silent for once, looked at Celeste. Her mask cracked. "You all hate me," she whispered. "We trusted you," I said. "That's different." An hour later at the hospital, Julian was stable. The toxicology screen confirmed it. Benzodiazepines, prescription sedatives. Mixed with alcohol, it could have caused serious respiratory distress. I sat beside his bed while detectives asked questions. Julian answered clearly. "She's done things before," he said. "Manipulative, gaslighting, making me doubt reality. But this crossed into something else." He looked at me. "She meant it for Sophia." The detective nodded. "We'll need a formal statement." I gave it to them, every detail, from the mirror to the switch, from Celeste's smirk to Julian's stumble. Later that night, I stood outside the hospital entrance as Celeste was escorted out of the ER in cuffs. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked at me. "I didn't mean to hurt him." "But you meant to hurt me," I said. That was the last thing I said to her. 2 days later, I received a call from the DA's office. Celeste was being charged with administering a controlled substance without consent and reckless endangerment. It wouldn't be jail, not right away, but it would be public. It would be permanent. The news made headlines not because of who she was, but because of how quiet it all looked from the outside. The press called it the Champagne Sister incident. I called it closure. A week after the party, my father showed up at my apartment. No words, just a hug. He handed me a flash drive. "It's the footage, in case she tries to twist the story." I stared at the silver object, so small, but weightier than any apology he could have offered. Julian filed for divorce within the month. He moved into a small rental near Cambridge and began documenting years of emotional abuse he'd been too ashamed to name before. He told me once quietly, "The only thing more dangerous than a liar is a liar who believes her own version." Celeste's boutique lost half its clients. Brides didn't want to say yes to the dress in the same showroom where police arrived with warrants. She started therapy, court-ordered. I didn't gloat. Some victories are loud, others are silent. Mine was knowing I could have stayed quiet again. But I didn't, and that changed everything. The fallout wasn't a bang. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling. One whisper, one headline, one pair of eyes finally refusing to look away. 3 days after the party, the Boston Chronicle ran the headline. "Socialite bride accused of drugging sister at vow renewal gala." They used our names. Celeste's name. Not just a woman, but her specifically. Her PR firm issued a rushed statement. "We deny any malicious intent." It was a misunderstanding involving medication. But the damage had already seeded. The clients at Maison Celeste began canceling appointments. One bride posted on Instagram, "I can't get married in a dress made by someone who poisons her sister. Sorry, not sorry." I didn't repost it, but I saw it, and I smiled, just a little. A week later, our family gathered in my parents' Beacon Hill townhouse. No wine, no music, no flowers. Just 4 chairs, one bitter silence. Celeste was already there when I arrived. Face bare, eyes red. Not from remorse, from exposure. "I don't know what to say," my father started. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "We've all been saying nothing for years. That's the problem." Celeste looked up. Her voice rasped. "You switched the glass." I did. "That wasn't fair." I leaned forward. "No, Celeste, you drugging me wasn't fair." She blinked. "I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted you quiet, humble. I wanted to take something back." From me, I laughed bitterly. "You've taken everything, and I let you." There it was, the core, the truth. I let her, because I thought family meant absorbing damage silently, because I mistook loyalty for submission, because I didn't know I was allowed to say no. Until that night. Julian didn't press criminal charges in the end, but the civil lawsuit, he filed that with no hesitation. Emotional trauma, medical endangerment, reputational harm. Celeste's lawyer begged for settlement. They reached one quietly, but the damage echoed. Julian moved out permanently. He changed his number. He went no contact. And for the first time in 10 years, he said to me, "I feel like I can hear my own voice again." Our parents complicated. My mother still believes Celeste didn't mean it, that she's sick, not cruel. But my father, he stopped defending her. He visited me the next week with a manila envelope. Inside letters from years ago. Cards I wrote to Celeste that were never opened. A scholarship congratulations letter she'd hidden. My father had found them in her desk drawer, still sealed. "I thought she was just impulsive," he said, eyes hollow. "Not dangerous." I didn't need his apology. I needed him to stop pretending. Maybe he finally had. Celeste started therapy, real therapy this time. Borderline personality disorder, the doctors said. Emotional dysregulation, abandonment issues, narcissistic traits. But even diagnoses don't excuse decisions. She asked to meet me once weeks later. I agreed. We sat across from each other at a public cafe. Neutral ground. "I lost everything," she whispered. "No," I said. "You lost control. There's a difference." She nodded. "I was afraid you'd take him." I raised an eyebrow. "Julian, you listened to him. He looked at you like he used to look at me." I didn't respond, because maybe she was right. But what she never understood was that I didn't want Julian. I wanted peace. I wanted not to flinch every time a compliment came with a barb. I wanted to walk into a room and not brace for the hidden jab wrapped in silk. I wanted a sister, not a rival. But some wishes arrived too late. 6 months passed. The boutique rebranded, but it never recovered. Julian moved to Maine, opened a trauma recovery center. He invited me to the launch. I went. Not for him, for me. I stood in a room where healing wasn't a performance, where silence was gentle, not sharp. He hugged me before I left. "You know," he said, "I used to think strength was staying. But maybe real strength is leaving before you disappear." The last time I saw Celeste, she was walking out of a therapy session downtown. No makeup, no entourage, just her and a brown paper bag with takeout. She didn't see me, and I didn't stop her, because not every ending needs a confrontation. Sometimes it just needs distance. People asked me later, "Did you plan to let Julian drink it?" No, but when the moment came and the glass shimmered in my hand and her lies sat bubbling beneath gold bubbles, I made a decision. A quiet one, a small one, but it rippled like an earthquake. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just one switched glass, one step toward the truth, and one sister finally refusing to drink it. 6 months later, I no longer rehearse comebacks in the shower. I no longer second-guess what I saw or wonder if speaking up made me cruel. I know now it made me free. I've moved into a small brownstone outside Boston, quiet, sun-drenched, with windows that don't face anyone else's. I changed my number, blocked names that used to make my stomach knot. I started therapy, real therapy. Turns out, being gaslit by family feels exactly like losing your balance in a room that insists the floor is flat. But my footing is firmer now. Julian emails sometimes updates from Maine, pictures of rescue dogs and garden tomatoes. He's happy, not dramatic happy, quiet happy. And me, I finally picked up my camera again. Portraits of women who've been told they're too much, too emotional, too dramatic. I tell them, "You're not too much. They were just never enough to handle your clarity." As for Celeste, she moved to Chicago, new city, new therapist, new name for the boutique. But some scars can't be rebranded. I haven't heard from her since. And honestly, I don't need to, because closure isn't confrontation. Sometimes closure is knowing the truth, knowing your worth, knowing that choosing yourself without explanation is the loudest kind of justice there is. Has someone in your family ever tried to rewrite your reality? Did you stay quiet? or switch the glass? I want to hear your story. Comment below and tell me, was Sophia right, or did she go too far? This was Sophia's revenge story. What would you do next?